Welcome to Fully Booked, the bookish podcast where I'll chat about all things book and reading related. Whether you're a new or a pro reader, there's something for everyone to learn. I'm here to help you on your reading journey and find that next great read that will keep you fully booked. Hello, readers, and welcome to episode 58 of Fully Booked. I'm your host, Natalie, and today's episode is going to be my November and December wrap-up. Now, normally I post the bi-monthly wrap-ups at the start of the month because timing-wise, that just makes more sense for you guys to be able to see and hear everything that I've read over the past couple months. But obviously, it was more pressing for me to post my entire 2025 reading wrap-up first before my bi-monthly wrap-up. So that is what we did this past month. So hopefully you guys are all here still with me today and ready to hear about all the books I read in the last months of 2025. Also, since we're now well into January by the time you guys are watching, I just wanted to know, how are we all doing? Are we enjoying 2026 so far? I'm actually really curious because this is actually past me talking to future all of you, because it's actually technically 2025 still, at least part of while I'm filming this wrap up. So yeah, I'm really curious to know, how is everyone's new year going so far? Are we sticking to our New Year's resolutions? Have we set goals for ourselves? If you can't tell from the way I talked about my reading goals earlier in 2025, I'm a very goal-oriented person. I like to make plans and try to stick to things where I can. That's just kind of how my mind works, but I'd love to hear how all you guys are actually doing. But I don't want to waste any more time, so let's just get into today's wrap-up. So, starting with what I read in November, and of course the November stats, I actually messed up a little bit, I realized, in my rapid fire wrap-up because I forgot to include the very last book I read, which makes sense because I did finish it literally on the last day of November. So I actually ended up reading 9 books in November. I read 3 out of 4 from my monthly TBR. I also read 2 books from my holiday TBR, and we had 0 DNFs, which is very good. I'm always very pleased with that, if you guys can't tell. And also just buckle up because this month was probably the most varied month of reading in terms of genre and mood. So the first book I read was The Inmate by Freida McFadden, which I actually did rate 4 stars. This was actually one of her slightly better written ones compared to some of the other ones I've read this year. And to get into this one a little bit, we basically follow our FMC Brooke, who has moved back to her parents' hometown. And so she moves there, and she also starts a new job at the men's maximum security prison, where her ex and almost killer Shane happens to be imprisoned there. And so obviously she ends up running into him, and then the rest of the story is kind of just this dual timeline between the past and present, where we find out some things that happened in the past, how Shane ended up in prison, and then also some things she finds out in the present that she didn't know before, or maybe that she also didn't notice before. You guys probably already know by now that Freida McFadden is not my favorite thriller author by far anymore. She's definitely just one that I turn to when I need that quick, super fast and easy thriller palette cleanser, and that is exactly what this book did, and it just came at the perfect time this month. I will say the twist was surprising in this one for me still, although it definitely got a little bit outlandish at a certain point in the book, but I still enjoyed it. Again, the writing overall was more bearable in me for this one, because I feel like, especially in, I want to say, The Tenant, some of the inner monologue and the dialogue in that one just wasn't really doing it for me, but this one, I don't know. I was just still able to enjoy. So definitely I would recommend this one over, again, like I said, a bunch of the other ones that I read earlier this year. Now, for a book that I am more excited to talk about, I did finally read Out on a Limb by Hannah Bonham Young, which I ended up rating 4.5 stars, and I gave it a 3 spice rating. Now, for those of you who are romance readers like myself, you've probably seen this book circulating around a ton already. It's pretty much been popular at least since 2023, I want to say. But just to go over it a little bit, we do have our 2 main characters, Win and Bo, in this one, who meet and basically hook up at their mutual friend's Halloween party, and then what happens afterwards? Accidental pregnancy, of course. And then the whole book is basically just following the 2 of them as they find out this news, and then they go through the pregnancy journey together, figuring out how they're going to co-parent while also getting to know each other kind of as friends. And it's amazing how good of an author Hannah Bonham Young is, and she's able to make you like certain tropes, because I think this book pretty much changed everyone's mind on the accidental pregnancy trope, because I feel like it's one of those tropes where in the past authors kind of just throw it in near the end of the book almost as like plot filler. But this one where, you know, basically most of the plot does revolve around the pregnancy. Like the pregnancy is obviously a huge part of this book. It just made a lot more sense that there's going to be a lot more discussion, but yeah, it's just the way she wrote, again, the plot and then the arc in terms of each of their character arcs and then also their relationship arc just made me like it a lot. I think there were a lot of good real conversations that we got to see the two of them have in this book, especially also because each of them deal with something called a limb difference, where our FMC has an underdeveloped right hand, I think it was, and then Bo has a prosthetic leg. And so there's a lot of talk about their limb differences as well and how they're gonna deal with that in terms of like helping each other as individuals, but also how they're going to deal with that as parents and when they have this new baby in their lives. So I really enjoyed those specific conversations as well. That's not something I read about, obviously, in a lot of books in general. So that was an interesting aspect. I think my only little gripes with this book was that the two of them almost just got along too well. Not even just from the moment that they met, but even throughout the whole story. I feel like the whole time they just clicked on every single thing that they would talk about. Their interests just aligned so well. It was almost like they were kind of the same person in a lot of like aspects of personality and certain character traits. I think that I found that hard because while I enjoyed that as a reader, I didn't really find it believable at times because they just had no problem except for a little bit of miscommunication that happens around like their feelings toward each other at certain points in the book. There was just nothing else. I think this is the third Hannah Bonham Young novel that I've read this year now, so if you guys can't tell, it's clear that she is a new favorite romance author of mine. Also, I'm probably a bit biased because she's also Canadian and she's from the same province that I live in. If you guys remember my review of People Watching, I actually didn't love that book, but I still want to continue that duet, and I'm pretty sure that the sequel to that one, People Pleasing, I think it's going to be called, is going to be coming out as of next fall. So I'm definitely going to be keeping my eye out and waiting patiently for that one. Then, for our first holiday read this season, I did end up picking up Always in December by Emily Stone, ironically in November, and I ended up rating this one 3.5 stars, and I gave it a 1 spice rating because this is a contemporary holiday romance, and I do want to start off by saying that I had higher expectations for this one, and I ended up being disappointed, just because I thought this was going to be way more emotional and heart-wrenching. I was going to cry a lot, and I barely cried over this one. I will say, though, that it did end up aligning somewhat with the movie that I paired it with in my holiday TBR episode, which was last Christmas, where I feel like the premises did share some similarities, but I feel like we had overall different feel of this book versus that movie, where the book felt a bit more serious, and Last Christmas has a little bit of a comedic tone to it. I feel like this story is actually a pretty simple one where we basically meet our two main characters, Josie and Max, who are alone around Christmas time in London, and so they meet. They spend a few days together, they kind of start to fall in love, but then all of a sudden Max kind of ups and leaves without giving much of a reason why. And so Josie's kind of just left in the dark by the two of them and forced to subsequently move on. Which is hard because they then coincidentally keep bumping into each other over the course of the next year. It's also complicated because every time they keep bumping into each other, they're always in a relationship with someone else. And so it's kind of hard for them to revisit what happened between the two of them at Christmas time before. And that's pretty much this book until we get to the very end and we finally find out like what actually was happening. There is something sad that happens at the end of this book. I did shed a few slight tears over that part. I didn't end up having a lot of feelings about this book, which is disappointing because I feel like this premise could have been really, really romantic and tragic, but the execution kind of just made it flop for me, where I did not feel connected to either of our main characters throughout this whole book, and I also really did not get the connection between our two main characters. I just did not see any real like chemistry and sparks between two of them throughout this whole book, which is strange because she does try to build upon even like emotional connection even when they first meet in London the first time around. But even as they kept bumping and meeting into each other, I just didn't really see any real emotional connection between the two of them. And I did not understand why they felt so strongly, even at the very end of the book. So yeah, I feel like this book could have been more, but for some reason, it just flopped for me. Which is actually very sad because actually, if I hold the book up closer, maybe you guys can see, there is a blurb by Josie Silver on the front cover of this book, who is the author of One Day in December, which you guys know, I liked that book quite a bit more. So I thought I would have enjoyed this book because it felt like it should have been that same vein of One Day in December. I will say though that I still enjoyed this author's writing, even though this book was more on the serious side. I felt like I liked some of the descriptions of the different moments and settings that we got from this book, especially since we again traveled to a bunch of different settings throughout this story. I will say maybe I will just try a different book of hers and see if that does it for me. I did notice that a couple of her more recent holiday romances are more on the rom-com side, especially the one that was just released this year. So I think the one that was just released was a second chance fake dating holiday rom-com. So I don't know, maybe if I just try another one of her books, I might just like one of those a bit better, and this one just wasn't it for me. And then getting back on the thriller vein, I read Survive the Night by Riley Sager, which I ended up rating 4 stars. And I'm pretty happy that I completed this one when I did, because if you guys don't follow me on Instagram or Goodreads, this was my 100th read of 2025, which is pretty exciting to reach that in November this past year. And I did talk a bit about this one in my winter TBR episode, but to go over it again, for those of you guys who don't watch every single episode or video, we have a pretty simple premise in this one where we're following our FMC Charlie, who is at university, and she needs a ride back to her hometown. And so she meets this guy, Josh, in her campus commons and decides to hitch a ride home with him because he's going in the same direction. So this book starts off innocently enough where they're on basically this late night road trip. They're talking, kind of getting to know each other until things kind of start to get weird and a bit suspicious even. And then Charlie's kind of wondering who this guy actually is. Is she in the car with a killer? This situation is also tense because there's this campus serial killer at large, hence why she's wondering if maybe she stepped in the car of a murderer. Although low-key, if there was a campus serial killer at large, I don't think I would be stepping in a car of a stranger, but that's just me, and you guys know how these stories go because it's a thriller. That's pretty much it for this book. We also have this very nostalgic feel because this book is set in the 90s, which also makes these situations a lot more tense and unsettling. Our FMC Charlie is also a film major, so she's really into these old classic films, and that is kind of a theme that keeps coming up throughout this whole book. So I thought this was a fairly good thriller overall, not just of Riley Sager's. I think partly because obviously we kind of have a hostage situation going on in this book, but unlike other hostage thrillers where it's usually like a group situation and there's a bunch of people being kept hostage or kidnapped, this one was pretty much just the two of them in the situation, in the car, and that actually made the situation a lot more tense and exciting at times. And yeah, so it's just something a little bit different. I actually enjoyed it quite a bit. But at the same time, because the book was mostly following the two of them, at least till a little bit later on in the book, we don't really have a lot going on and that we can grasp onto because it's literally just these two characters in this one setting. And there's nothing else going on in terms of, yeah, different characters, moving through different settings, etc. Not that it was boring, but again, there just wasn't enough for me to grasp onto, and especially for a thriller. I would say this book, in terms of all the Riley Sager books I've read, definitely ranks somewhere in the middle. I'd really have to go back and look at all the books that I've read of his, especially because I read quite a few of his books last year. Overall, though, so far, I think I would say The Only One Left is probably my favorite out of all the ones I read, just because there's so much going on that book. But again, if you're looking for a kind of hostage thriller book to read, then this one would be a pretty good read. Now, these next two books are probably going to seem a bit out of whack for the month of November, but I did go on a beach cruise vacation for about a week in November, which is why I ended up picking up The Hotel Nantucket by Ellen Hilderbrand. I gave this 3.25 stars and a 1 spice rating because there were minor romance subplots in this book. I feel like because there's so much going on in Ellen Hilderbrand books, I almost can't describe the plot that well. So I feel like all you really need to know for this one is that we follow this huge cast of characters as they start working at the newly reopened Hotel Nantucket. We really follow these characters as they're trying to achieve a 5-star key rating for this new hotel. It's basically this sought-after rating from this very mysterious but renowned hotel blogger, Shelley Carpenter. We also have a ghost who haunts the hotel throughout most of this story. Otherwise, I feel like this book is basically just like a couple of Ellen Hilderbrand's other books where it's kind of like a hodgepodge. If you guys can't tell from my rating, I think I've decided that Ellen Hilderbrand is just not really the author for me, unfortunately. I don't know what it is about the way she writes in third person. It's just not really that engaging, which is strange because I do like third person narrative from other authors. Like, you guys know, I love Friedrich Bachman, Rebecca Ross. I think this is probably just a problem with this book and maybe some of her other books, is that whenever she has characters that are of a younger age, and by younger, I mean around my age, around the Gen Z generation, I feel like she tries to incorporate Gen Z pop culture and language references, and usually in conversation between like characters of a different age. And I don't know what it is about the way she incorporates the language and the pop culture references that is kind of not fitting at all. And there's kind of like this big misalignment where when someone from, say, one of the older generations, like Gen X, I think that's around the generation that Ellen Hilderbrand is in herself. But the way an older generation will try to interpret and then portray the younger generation, how they think they act and behave, there's just kind of this misalignment, and there's something about it that just doesn't work. If any of you guys watched the last season of The Summer I Turned Pretty and some scenes and stuff they threw in there, you'll kind of know what I mean. It's kind of that feeling. I hate to say that, but it's just kind of how it feels. The one thing I will say is that I do just love the way she describes and sets the scene of Nantucket, and even in particular the hotel in this book. She's definitely very descriptive, and it really sets the mood. I feel like her books always put me in the very summery mood, or makes me want to live in like a beach town. But other than that element of the beach and Nantucket setting, there's just not enough for me to enjoy in an Ellen Hilderbrand book. And I think she's definitely one of those authors that I'm just gonna have to reserve her books for like mainly the summertime, or if I do go on vacation and I want to turn my brain off a bit and just have a book that is very easy to jump in and out of. Also, I do want to apologize if any of you guys are big Ellen Hilderbrand fans, and also let me know if you have any favorite books of hers, anything that you would recommend that I read next, because I actually have only read this book, 28 Summers, and I attempted to read The Academy, but I kind of, again, had some similar issues with Gen Z references. So yeah, if there's something I should try to pick up of hers next, do let me know. Then continuing to follow along the beach holiday theme, I picked up One Italian Summer by Rebecca Searle. I did rate this one 3.75 stars, and I gave it a 2 spice rating, although I do want to note that while there's technically spice that happens in her books, the romance subplot is so minuscule. With that, this is a contemporary magical realism novel. We do follow our FMC, Katie, who is just struggling a lot overall with grief and the loss of her mother, who she also considered her best friend. She's struggling with where she is in her marriage and if she even wants to be married still. So with all of that, she basically decides to take the trip to Italy by herself that she was supposed to take with her mother, but obviously they never got the chance to. And so she ventures to this small town along the Amalfi Coast in Italy. I think it's called Positano. I don't know if I said that right. She goes there only to run into a younger version of her mother, which is where the magical realism concept comes into play, because this younger version of her mother, I believe she's supposed to be around the same age as Katie, so maybe around like 30 years old. And then the two of them just spend all this time together, almost as if they were friends, since they're technically around the same age. She's also finding out all these things about her mother that she never even knew while she was alive. And so with that, she finds out some truths, some secrets from the past that she never knew about, and that end up being a huge revelation and kind of create this huge turning point for our FMC. I will say, I feel like I enjoyed this premise and the magical realism concept because it was able to bring up a lot of good conversation and also convey a lot of interesting and good themes and messages. I feel like this book just had this huge contrast and kind of that feeling where two things can be true at the same time, where we talked a lot about how to live a good life, but also being content, but that it's also okay to question things at the same time, feeling lost, but you can find your way at the same time. That was just very much the feeling and the messaging of this book, which I felt like was so relevant for me and where I am. So I was really able to connect to that and enjoy those messages in the book. But otherwise, I kind of had the problem, likewise, with Always in December, where I didn't feel connected to our main character, and especially our FMC, where I feel like I still wanted to know so much more about her by the end of the book. I felt like there was so little that we knew and found out about her as the story went on. I feel like whenever we did find out details about her life and her character, it was always like through her mother's eyes and her point of view of like, she would be describing, oh, my mom said you should always do this to like live a good life. It just made me feel disconnected from our FMC because I felt like we were only getting perspective of how she saw herself through her mother's eyes and not actually how she just saw herself through her own eyes, if that makes sense. The magical realism premises of all of Rebecca Searle's books are so good. They're actually kind of similar to Ashley Poston in that sense, except that I feel like Rebecca Searle leans a little more on the contemporary and emotional side. And so while I didn't enjoy this book a ton, I definitely still want to check out some of her other books. And actually, a little spoiler, I actually did get the arc to her newest release that is coming out in a couple months, I guess from the time you guys are watching this. So I still hope to read that one as well as explore the rest of her backlist because some of her books just sound so good. Switching gears back to the Christmas holiday theme, I then read Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan, which I decided not to rate because this was a very short story. I think I sold this to you guys as being like a Christmas Carol but set in Ireland. I don't think that's really true. This book is really not like that book at all. It's not even like It's a Wonderful Life, which I also thought at first when I read the premise. It's honestly just this very mundane litfic novel set in Ireland where we follow this MMC Bill Furlong who is just an ordinary man. He is a coal merchant in his small town in Ireland, just a very hard worker and determined to provide a good life for his wife and his 5 daughters, I believe. Talk about big Irish families. We really just see him going through the mundaneness of everyday life, but also questioning at the same time if there's more to life, kind of asking those bigger picture questions. We also have a lot of themes about paying it forward in this book, which was interesting. I did enjoy, again, some of those themes. We also talk a lot about poverty, upbringing, and how that shapes someone's life in general. And there was also a piece of, I guess, Irish history that I learned about that I didn't know about before. If you guys haven't heard about Magdalen laundries, this is something that was also discussed a lot throughout this short story. Basically what it is, it's an asylum or institution rather, where women of different kind of fallen situations could go and live there for free. Women who were unmarried, pregnant, victims of sexual assault or violence could go to these institutions, but in exchange for boarding there, they had to perform a lot of unpaid manual labor, which is obviously very problematic. It was interesting getting to learn about that piece of history through this short story. There's not much more about to say about this. It's one of those very, again, quiet stories of a quiet character and a mostly quiet life. So if you like those kinds of stories, then this is definitely a good pick. And of course, if you have more time on your hands, then you can definitely finish this in less than a day. I'm kind of sad to talk to you guys about this next book because had I picked this up at the right time, I would have enjoyed it so much more. And that is A Fire Endless by Rebecca Ross, which I rated 3.5 stars. And I gave it a 2.5 spice rating. If you guys have only read Rebecca Ross's YA fantasy novels, then you'll know that those are more closed door. This one is one of her adult fantasy novels, which is a little more on the open door side. Not spicy by any means, but still. Disclaimer before I get into my full review of this book that know how completely subjective the rating was that I gave this book. Again, I completely picked it up at the wrong time. I feel like by the time I got into the book and realized I should have DNF'd it, I got so far in, and I didn't want to have to soft DNF and come back and have to relearn everything that happened in the first book in this duology. So I kind of forced myself to push through and just finish this since this is only a duology, but maybe that was the wrong call in the end since I didn't really enjoy this book that much. And I can't really say much about the plot of this because this is the sequel and the final book in this River Enchanted duology where we're set on the same Isle of Cadence. We're following our same two main characters, Jack and Adira, and we continue exploring this world as well as the mortal and spirit realms. That's really all I can say. And I will say I did actually enjoy the first half of this book where we were diving a lot more into the world and the setting, especially because we're set on the western part of the Isle in this book, whereas in the first book we were mostly on the eastern part. We also get introduced to some new characters in this story, so I was enjoying learning about all of that. But after the first half, I just got really disinterested for some reason in the world and the characters. But it probably also did not help that I finished the rest of this book all on audio and I didn't even pick up the physical or the ebook again. Again, completely my fault. I think I mentioned it in my A River Enchanted review that there's a lot of like folklore type of aspects, also like kind of Celtic and Gaelic kind of vibes and cultural aspects that she brought and wove into this story, which are so beautiful. It also did make the story very richly detailed, but it just wasn't my favorite personally. You guys have seen me read a bunch of books by Rebecca Ross now. I think this is actually the 5th book that I read of hers this year. I've read all of her books within 2025, and so you already know she's an amazing fantasy author, a favorite of mine. This series just wasn't exactly it for me, but I'm sure so many of you who, if you've already read Divine Rivals or, whatever of hers, then you'll love this duology. And for the final book of November, I did read The Gingerbread Bakery by Laurie Gilmore. I gave this 3.5 stars and 3 spice rating. Looking at the rest of the Dream Harbor series, this is the highest rating that I gave to a book so far, which makes sense considering that going into this book, I was under the impression that this was going to be the finale for the Dream Harbor series, and it turns out there's going to be a 6th book coming out in spring. I know, guys. I was just as surprised. I've already mentioned this book a couple times, and some of you might know what this is about, but to get into it, again, we do follow our couple, Annie and Mac, who we have seen glimpses of them from the beginning. We already know that they don't like each other, but this book kind of really just delves into their story, their past, and us finding out kind of the real reason why they don't like each other in the present. So we do get a dual timeline in this. Goodreads also describes one of the tropes as enemies to lovers, which is true because they don't like each other. But at the same time, I actually feel like the second chance romance trope would be a better way to describe this book since they kind of had something going on in the past. I will say, I actually did like the past timeline and seeing their younger selves and how the two of them connected, interacted. But otherwise, I feel like I didn't like a lot of the present timeline. I felt like just everything about their story was just very typical, from the way that like Annie hated Max so much, and yet I feel like he never actually really hated her. He was actually more nice to her, or at least way more nice to her than she was to him. Also, I thought they were kind of immature in the past and present timeline, which was kind of strange because they're supposed to be in their late 20s in the present, yet everything they were doing and saying with each other felt kind of high school at times, and it just felt a little strange to me. As well as, I feel like the conflict and the things from the past that they had going on between two of them that were kind of the obstacles just got resolved way too quickly. Like, we literally threw it in near the very end of the book, or as near the end as you can get, and then everything was fine. I was just kind of a little confused because I felt like we were kind of sweeping things off to the side. Like, it was just, the progression was just way too quick for me. I felt like we needed to like build up a little more because we kind of just went from like 0 to 60. You guys already know this was not my favorite series or interconnected standalone to read. That, and with getting this kind of conclusion into their story, I feel satisfied enough that I am deciding to DNF and not continue on with the Dream Harbor series. Actually, I know a lot of people probably don't consider these interconnected standalones series, but I guess because I'm a romance reader and there are a lot of romance books that are these interconnected standalones, I tend to take them very seriously, and I get so invested, I think, in the character sometimes that I just want to read every single story. So it's more of a conscious decision for me. I decide to not continue on in an interconnected standalone. Yeah, I just had no interest in picking up the next book since it's like a completely new couple that we only got a tiny glimpse of in this book. For those of you watching right now, yes, I did get a whole new couch. Yes, I moved all the furniture around in my place, and I still have my Christmas tree up, which makes that the perfect segue to get into my December wrap up. So to start off with the stats for December, I ended up reading 8 books. I read 3 out of 4 of my monthly TBR. In addition, I read 3 books from my holiday TBR, and unfortunately to end out the month as well as 2025, I did end up having 1 DNF, which I actually think I'm going to switch it up, and I'm going to talk about that book first before we get into the rest of today's wrap-up. So to start off with the book that I DNF'd, I actually did briefly talk about it in the most recent reading vlog that I posted, which should be up before today's episode, so if you guys haven't watched that, you should definitely go do that, which is up on my YouTube. In that video, I did briefly talk about how I ended up DNFing Quicksilver by Callie Hart, and again, like I said in that video, those of you who've been watching the pod, watching me for some time now, probably already knew that that book was not going to be my fave, and I don't even think I need to give that much introduction to what this book is about. We are basically set in a world where fairies and humans exist together, and our FMC accidentally ends up in the Fae realm. We also have some alchemy kind of magic going on, which unfortunately I didn't get into a lot since I ended up DNFing this book. I got about 30% of the way into the book, which wasn't too bad, but it was just already enough for me to discern that I just did not want to put myself through the whole 600 plus pages that this book was. I feel like I actually was enjoying the fantasy world building aspect of the book, where we were getting some descriptions of the human versus then the Fae realm, and I did find that interesting, as well as our FMC is finding out those things kind of along with the reader. But honestly, where it just went wrong for me was the romance. If there is a romance spectrum of like insta-lust to yearning, then I think you guys know that I fall much more on the yearning side. I love more of a slow burn, like they don't even touch or kiss until more than halfway into the book. And this one, I only got 30% in, and they were already doing a lot of different things. I also didn't love the banter. I could definitely see how other people would enjoy it. I think if you like that very quick, kind of sarcastic style banter, kind of similar to Fourth Wing, I would say, then you actually might enjoy this book. But yeah, that's just not really what I'm looking for when I'm reading romantasy or fantasy romance. Those just ended up being my feelings. But if you enjoyed this, then actually I'd love to hear. And then getting into the books I actually did read in December, the first one I did read was BK Borison's newest release, Good Spirits, which I ended up rating 3.75 stars. I did give it a free spice rating. Her books are kind of interesting because they have a very cozy feel. The characters are always very cozy, yet the spice scenes tend to get a little bit much, at least for me and what I like to read. But yeah, this one was a paranormal Christmas romance, which is very, very loosely based on A Christmas Carol. And I say loosely based because we basically follow this ghost of Christmas past, Nolan, who is assigned to haunt our FMC, Harriet. But unlike Scrooge in A Christmas Carol, where he's honestly a genuinely bad person, Harriet seems to be a pretty decent person, at least on the outside, and they can't really figure out why he's supposed to be haunting her and what their mission is. So we kind of go through the story in that way. We're trying to figure out the real reason why he was assigned to her. I felt like this was actually my first real BK Borison read because I did listen to Lovelight Farms on audio, and honestly, I didn't really enjoy that book that much. And I think part of the reason why I haven't enjoyed her books so far, and this book cemented for me, is that the pacing, specifically of the plot, is always kind of off for me in her books. I feel like we start out a little bit slow, and then a lot happens later in the book, but I don't understand why. And yeah, I just felt like in this one, we weren't getting a lot of details and actually moving the plot along for the first 2/3 of the book at least. And we were really focused on building the romance and the connection between Harriet and Nolan, which I enjoyed seeing those scenes, and I did really enjoy their connection. I did think they had good banter, but I just wanted a little more to be happening with the actual storyline. Also, I'm just gonna say the ending to me did not make sense at all in this book. I know this is supposed to be, again, paranormal. I would have liked a little bit more to be explained. Personally, I will say though, like I was saying, how her characters are so cozy and they give off certain feeling, I did really enjoy our MCs in this one, especially Harriet and the journey of healing that she went on. She's this person who is a perpetual people pleaser and still seeks approval from her parents and her family. And that's something she struggles with throughout the course of this story. She finally learns to accept herself for who she really is and even embrace all of her choices and her personality, which I really enjoyed seeing that healing journey. I did think that was a really nice element of this book. And I did like our MMC, but I feel like we didn't get to know as much about him as we did about Harriet, because also partly because a lot of the book is him haunting her and they're going through her memories. So we get to see a lot of her past and we understand a lot about her character, but I feel like with that, we didn't get to go into as much of Nolan's past and his background. And I kind of wanted to see a bit of him, but definitely if you are a romance reader who maybe you don't care about plot and you're really there for the romance, if you like cozy characters and cozy settings, I think you'll definitely like B.K. Borson's stories. And despite my issues with the pacing, I still do really want to get to her other books, especially First Time Caller and Now Back to You. Now, I might be going through the next few books kind of quickly because I feel like I honestly just picked up a lot of Christmas brain off books that I didn't have to think too much about and that I didn't end up rating super highly, if I'm going to be completely honest. So with that, the next book that I picked up was A Very Merry Bromance by Lyssa Kay Adams. This is, I believe, the final book in the Bromance Book Club Interconnected Standalones. I did read the very first in this Interconnected Standalones, but I'm already going to say that while I enjoy these books for what they are when I'm reading them, I don't really get much out of them in terms of the romance, the writing style, so I don't really feel compelled to read all of these. I did end up rating this a 3.5 stars, and I gave it a 2.75 spice rating. And in this one, we follow a country music star, Colton, who is kind of hung up on his one-night stand from many years ago, Gretchen, and they end up bumping into each other, I think it's 2 or 3 years later, kind of randomly, also coincidentally, because she basically needs him to do her a favor in order to help out her family business. So in exchange for that, he agrees to help her if she will go on dates with him, and then we just go from there. So we have Reverse Grumpy Sunshine going in this book, where Colton was honestly such a golden retriever. If you really like Isaiah from Play Along in the Windy City series, then I feel like you're really gonna like Colton's character. Otherwise, I do have to say, there was nothing else memorable about this book, even RFMC. I didn't dislike her, but there was just nothing that stood out about her. I think the problems and issues that she faced, I just couldn't really relate to personally as well. What I think is fun about these books is, again, the bromance friendship relationships, because all of the guys in this book are so encouraging towards each other. They just have such loyalty and such good friendships and trying to help each guy out in each of these stories. Again, if you like the Windy City series, you might like these books because they're kind of like those books, except we're set in Nashville instead of in Chicago. If you were looking for some interconnected standalones with more feel-good vibes and you, again, like that aspect of the brotherly friendships, then you could pick these up. But otherwise, I will say, I don't think this is my favorite interconnected standalone series ever. And then next up I read The Family Game by Catherine Stedman. This is a Christmas mystery thriller, although definitely go in expecting more mystery than thriller. I did end up rating this 3.5 stars. And so in this one, we follow a rising author, Harriet, who has just recently become engaged to her partner, Edward, who happens to be the heir to the very wealthy and affluent Holbeck family. And he's been estranged for some time for his family, but he finally agrees to let Harriet meet all the family, and so he takes her to a family dinner at their estate. she ends up meeting and getting pulled aside by his father, Robert, who hands her this tape and asks her to listen to it all the way through. And as she continues listening to the tape, we find out all of these family secrets and also some shocking confessions. I feel like I compared this book slightly to the Inheritance games when I initially talked about it on my TBR. It's not really like that book, especially because the puzzles aspect didn't really come into play until, again, near the end of the book. And overall, as a mystery thriller, I just felt like this book was very predictable. Like, the twist that happened, I feel like I technically could have predicted it before I even started this book, and then there was just nothing else that really got me. The writing was alright, and the games that they do play in this book were a fun added element. I feel like you can really just take this book for what it is. Like, if you're looking for a good Christmas mystery thriller, then this would be a good pick. Going back to the Christmas romances, I then picked up It Happened One Christmas by Chantal Guertin. I think she's also a Canadian author, which is cool. So we have our typical grumpy sunshine going on, and then we're also set in a real small Canadian town. We follow our FMC Zoe, who is a film director who's trying to get the rights for her upcoming Christmas film, but the mayor of the town that she wants to film in, Benoit, will not grant her the rights because he just doesn't really believe in attracting so many tourists to the town in order to boost the town's economy. I feel like that's all you really need to know about this book. We also have elements like the two of them getting stuck in a snowstorm and being trapped inside together, forced proximity. I have to say about this book, I feel like plot-wise, there was actually a little too much going on for me. I actually feel like I would have preferred if we focused in on just her trying to film this movie, because once the snowstorm element came along and the two of them were then on this journey to find their way back home and stuff like that, I just felt like there was too much going on and we were kind of losing too much focus, which I didn't really enjoy. And honestly, I was just not rooting for the couple and the romance in this book. I didn't think they had any real chemistry and connection, and I didn't understand why they think they did. And I feel like the romance progression just went from 0 to 60. All I will have to say is that I did enjoy the setting, this book, and the different places that were being described in the small town of Chelsea. I'm not sure if any of these places are real or loosely based on real places in Chelsea, but it's cool to know because it's a place that I could potentially visit in the future, especially since it's not that far from Ottawa, if I ever make it out to Ottawa again soon. But I do have one or two friends who live in Ottawa, so maybe I can take the chance at some point and visit them. But yeah, overall, for a Christmas romance or even a romance book, I wouldn't really suggest this. Then switching gears, I read Once and Again by Rebecca Searle. I ended up rating this one 3.75 stars with a 1.5 spice rating. This is her upcoming 2026 release, which I did get ahead of time, so thank you again to NetGalley and Atria Books for the e-arc. It's crazy that I only discovered her in 2025, and this is the third book that I've had the chance to read by her. So we basically follow 3 generations of women in this story. We follow Lauren, her mother, and her grandmother, who I'm forgetting the names of the last 2 right now. Basically, each of the women in her family are born with this gift of a silver ticket that allows them one chance to go back in the past and redo a certain moment or decision in time. And then as the story continues, we slowly find out more about each of these women, how they use their tickets, and how that choice had repercussions on not only their own lives, but also on the rest of their family relationships, which is something I really enjoyed about this story. I definitely could relate to how Rebecca Searle portrayed family dynamics and relationships and how they change a lot over time. And while I would say her writing style is actually more on the simple side, I feel like she's still able to just so effortlessly and poignantly touch on each of these themes and how the characters are experiencing certain moments in time. And I just find the way she writes is very relatable. Having said that, I do feel like the plot and character development was a bit off for me, especially the pacing of the plot was weird. A lot happened at the end of this book, whereas the first at least half of this book was a lot of setup and background and context, which was nice, but it was starting to get a bit unnecessary at some point, especially because obviously with the going back in time, it's kind of this magical realism concept going on. And I feel like with the last 2 books I read of hers, it was very subtle and she didn't necessarily explain. This one, for some reason, we were getting a bit more explanation. I think there were at least 2 chapters where we were literally talking about how this silver ticket worked and being able to go back to the past. And I feel like for a magical realism book, the whole point is to keep it more mysterious and unexplained. And so I didn't really understand why we were getting these more explicit explanations. I just feel like I didn't really need it as a reader personally. But again, if you love magical realism romance books like Ashley Poston, or if you're a more mythic Emily Henry lover, like I think if you like Happy Place, then I think you'll really like Rebecca Searle's books. So you all should definitely give her a try and definitely pick up Once Again when it comes out later this year. After that, I then picked up The Wedding Witch by Erin Sterling, which I ended up giving a 3-star and Spice rating. This is the 3rd book in the X-Hex Interconnected Standalone. I feel like I say Interconnected Standalone because you could honestly read these books on their own if you really wanted to. I don't think you need to remember what happens in each of the previous books. So in this one, we follow Tamsin and Bowen, who I think were mentioned in both of the previous books. They're both attending this wedding at this grand estate, and then they accidentally travel back to the past, and then they have to figure out how to get back to the future, just like the movie, while also getting Bowen's grandparents together. Other than that, I really don't have that much to say on this book. I feel like I actually even had trouble recounting the plot of this book. I think the problem is that this is definitely a witchy romance that leans more on the rom-com side, and I feel like for me, I have to really be in the mood for that sort of thing, and I just really wasn't. I kind of just picked this up just because. I feel like we also lost the plot at least halfway through the book. I didn't really know what exactly was going on and how we were going to resolve everything. So I was feeling a bit confused as the story went on. I will say, though, that if you really live for banter and rom-coms, then this book definitely delivers. If you like very witty, kind of a dry sense of humor and style of banter between our main characters, then again, you will like this. So yeah, if you're looking for that, if you're looking for just a super fun witchy romance, then these will deliver. And I would highly recommend that you pick these up on audio because they do all the accents in the audiobooks, so that's another fun element. Now, the next book I read was the only YA seasonal book that I ended up picking up, and that was The Holiday Switch by Tiff Marcello. I gave it 3.25 stars, and this is a YA no spice romance. So in this one, we follow our 2 MCs, Lila and Teddy, who end up working together at the Bookworm Inn. And of course, they don't like each other from the get-go as the story goes on, and they end up developing a friendship and then of course end up falling for each other. This one was also fun because our FMC Lila is a book blogger, but she's trying to keep it a secret from her family because of a kind of recent scandal that happened to them. And so she knows her parents wouldn't really approve of her being and posting online. Again, I don't have too much to say about that one except that it was again a super cute holiday romance. It's just one that made me smile. I enjoyed it a lot while I was reading it. I honestly don't know if this author has released any other books. This is the only book I've heard of by her. And I will say I did enjoy the touches of Filipino culture and tradition in this one because both our FMC and MMC are Filipino American, and so we touch on that aspect of their character as well as the story goes on. And I guess, small disclaimer, my husband and all my in-laws are Filipino Canadian as well, so I feel like I've learned a little bit about the culture and tradition as time has gone on, so it was just cool for me to see that in a book. So if you're looking for that YA Christmas book to look up, I would recommend this one. For the final book I read in December, we have Any Trope But You by Victoria Levine. This is basically a winter romance. I gave it a 3.25 stars and spice rating. And I know I sold this book initially to you guys as being like Anyone But You, but set in Alaska. And I feel like that's actually what this book ended up delivering, surprisingly. And so we follow our FMC Margot in the wake of kind of this scandal that she's in, where a private document of hers accidentally gets leaked to the public, and then she ends up going viral and gets canceled as an author, and she kind of has to reinvent herself in the wake of this scandal. And so with that, she decides to pivot from being a romance author to murder mystery. And so with that, she sets out to write her new book and goes on a trip to Alaska that her sister basically forces her to go on. And of course there she meets the proprietor, Forrest, and upon locking eyes on each other from the get-go, these two are into each other. But yeah, we go over the story of the two of them being on the resort together. They keep bumping into each other, spending time doing different activities. We also have this element of both of them are caretakers, where Margot cares for her sister Savannah, and Forrest is caring for his father after an accident that happened many years ago that left him, I can't remember if he was paralyzed or what kind of illness he had in this story now. I think for me, what was disappointing about this book was that the start of it was very strong, especially the way the very first chapter and scene was written, where we see the scandal unfold in her life, was actually very hilariously written. Like I think I was telling you guys before that this could honestly be a rom-com movie like Anyone But You, because the way it was written would just do very well on the screen. Because of the caretaker aspect, I feel like it almost had the potential to be a Catherine Center book where we see our characters struggle with a lot of different things in their life and go on this certain healing journey. I just feel like the book kind of fell flat and didn't really expand more upon that. And considering that both of our MCs were supposed to be caretakers for family members, I felt like the book ended a little bit unrealistically. Also, some of you may know that Catherine Center is pretty much a closed-door romance author, and this book was the very opposite of that. There were some things happening in this book that I was a little bit uncomfortable with. But I think if you're somebody who, again, enjoys more of the rom-com-y romances, if you like a different setting of being in Alaska during the winter time and all of that, then I think you will enjoy this book. This one just didn't quite hit for me. And that now brings my November and December wrap up to a close, and also the last wrap up technically of 2025. Even though this episode's being released in 2026. I hope you guys enjoyed hearing about all those books I read, and since I do bi-monthly wrap-ups and I realize it's just too much to list out, let me know in the comments or DM me what was your favorite book of November and December. I'd love to hear from all of you guys. And as always, rate and review the podcast wherever you're listening. Subscribe on YouTube if you're not already. We are going to be doing some fun Valentine's themes in the upcoming videos and episodes, so my romance readers can definitely get excited for that. But with all that being said, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next episode. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope you were able to take away something, and be sure to follow the podcast for more bookish content. Until next time, stay fully booked, and I'll talk to you soon.